Good morning, Nick.
Good morning.
This is Judy. So my biggest concern is unstable internet,
Mm-hmm.
So if I'm still getting that message pop up on my screen, I'll just dial in and you'll still see my face, hopefully. Hopefully
Okay.
it will be frozen, but I can always dial in and speak.
That's okay. That's great. Thank
Okay.
you. Good morning and welcome to everyone. Thank you all so much for being here for our ARC Fall 2020 Convocation. My name is Nick Daly. I happen every day. The pronouns I use are he or they, and I'm so glad that you all can be here with me today. I would like to start with a little bit of housekeeping, and I'm going to start with this piece. So if you all are in the Zoom, you all can set it up in this way. You can click view options at the top and have a side-by-side mode. You can use the slide to toggle the video sizes. And then you can hide all non-video participants. This will help you ensure that you can always see the interpreter as well as see the presenters and the slides that are being shown. Next, you should hide all non-video participants. Lastly, I just want to say this session is being recorded. And there's closed captioning available for this session. It should be at the bottom of the screen. If it is not visible at the bottom of the screen, please let me know. And lastly, the session is being recorded. Thank you all so much. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jesus Valle and our invited guest.
Thank you very much, Nick. I want to say good morning, friends and colleagues. I'm Professor Jesus Valle. I teach in the ARC English department, and I also direct the Native American Resource Center at American River College. And once again, I am proud to hold this moment with you as we give space to the ARC Indigenous Land Acknowledgement Statement. The use of this Indigenous Land Statement provides a platform for authentic dialogue between Native nations and our beloved American River College. I'm proud to say that ARC continues to lead both regionally and beyond in how we have engaged this important process. This distance mode honors us with a great learning opportunity wherever you happen to be. I challenge you to use native-land.ca to start to understand your relationship to the land and the people of the land. In these times of tremendous uncertainty, many turn and return to the land for healing and comfort. The constellation of our humanity is revealed in this as the land in so many ways speaks to us at this time. It is also the right time for Native nations to have a voice because we continue to live in a state of marginalization, erasure, historical mythologization, and invisibility. This summer has shown us that a sea change of social justice is upon us. Our ARC Native students have been at the forefront of this movement, and I'm so very proud of all of them for their tremendous resilience. Tribal nations have survived on this continent through the sheer will to live combined with the deep pools of our ancestors' wisdom. One such local Native nation is the Shingle Springs Band of Miwok Indians. They're the traditional caretakers of the land on which ARC resides. Shingle Springs has opened their doors to our Native students to share their ceremony ground and to send one of their singers, Pete, to bless our event when we hosted Native high school students last term. We deeply appreciated this support of our Native students. The idea of taking care of the community reflects the heart of this tribe. I want to share the tribe's mission briefly because it is so profound. The Shingle Springs Band of Miwok Indians is a federally recognized Indian tribe who will protect and enhance the quality of life of its members by preserving, protecting, and promoting its history, culture, and traditions, promoting self-sufficiency and a strong work ethic, exercising the powers of self-governance, governance, and sovereignty, while providing social, health, economic, and educational resources, opportunities, and services that contribute to the well-being of the tribal community. This morning, we are honored to have Melissa Tabaya, who is an ARC student representing Shingle Springs Rancheria. She has served on the Tribal Council for 14 years and also serves on the Gaming Authority and the Business Development Boards. She's also the director of TEK, T-E-K, which stands for Traditional Ecological Knowledge. Through TEK, she has brought back ancestral knowledge to her people and has built up the cultural department with true love and dedication for her people and in honor of her grandmothers. Melissa brought back traditional practices such as weaving, sacred songs, ceremony protocols, regalia making for dance, and the connection of her people to the water. Please join me in welcoming Melissa Tobiah from Shingle Springs.
Well, thank you so much for a great introduction. And I just first wanted to start off by saying thank you. Thank you so much for even doing a land acknowledgement. This is kind of a big deal, I think, for tribes, because most of the time people do not acknowledge the land. So today I just want to start off, and today I'm here to acknowledge the land that we occupy and acknowledge the people who were here taking care of it before us. The land of this region was home to many villages of the Nisenan, Maidu, and Miwok tribal nations. I would like to give thanks to this land who holds us and gives us a home. It is us, the people, who need to acknowledge land and take care of it. The Nisenan, Maidu, and Miwok people value this land and what it has to offer. And I think today I would just like to take a moment to actually think about how we can help Mother Earth. Everybody knows that right now a lot of things are happening and Mother Earth really needs us. So in the land acknowledgement for today, I would just like people to take away from this land acknowledgement and really try to think about what your role is in taking care of Mother Earth. Mother Earth is life to tribes. And right now we are fighting for our waterways. We are fighting for our salmon. And I think that people need to be conscious of what they're doing to our land. And so if you are just that person who is out at the river or out on a bike trail, just acknowledge the land. If it's just a piece of trash, if it's just anything that you can help Mother Earth, please, if you could do that. And so that's pretty much what I wanted to say. I know that today is a very exciting day. And I would just once again would like to say thank you. American River College was my college, is my college, and I had a great time. You know, when I started at ARC, they called it the mini Berkeley, and I definitely think that that is so true. So I would just like to say thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Melissa. We really, again, we appreciate you. We appreciate your nation and your family in particular for all of its enduring work on behalf of the people in the community, and especially with your connection to American River College and your traditional homeland. We appreciate how you maintain that with honor, pride, and dignity. So thank you. And thank you, Nick. I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jesus. And thank all of you. I would like just for a second to just take a breath, take in that information that we just heard. I'm so grateful. Oh, sorry, y'all. That's the wrong screen. I'm so grateful that we are all here today and together. To build community, to connect with each other and wrestle with some hard ideas. We have provided a short video to help us acknowledge the context that we will find ourselves in, both the challenges and the triumphs. We want to say that this video will feature images that may bring up emotions in the people who view it, and we encourage you to take care of yourself as needed. The video is about 4 minutes long.
You're broken down and tired of living life on the merry-go-round, and you can't find a fighter, but I see it in you, so we gon' walk it out. Ooh, mountain, we gon' walk it out and ooh, mountain. And I'll rise like the day. I'll rise unafraid. I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. And I'll rise up, I like the waves. I'll rise up, in spite of the ache. I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again. You, the silence isn't quiet, and it feels like it's getting hard to breathe. And I know you feel like dying, but I promise we'll take the world to its feet. Ooh, mountains, bring it to its feet. Ooh, mountains. And I'll rise like the day. I'll rise unafraid. I'll rise up, and I'll do it 1,000 times again.
Hi, y'all. I think we have some technical difficulties. Can you all see the video that's playing? Okay. Sorry, I think that there's some technical difficulties. So I'm gonna continue the video, and we will see where we go.
All we need is hope, and for that we have each other, and for that we have each other. And we will rise, we'll rise oh, we'll rise. I'll rise up, rise like the day. I'll rise up, in spite of the ache. I will rise 1,000 times again. And we'll rise up, I like the waves. We'll rise up, in spite of the ache. We'll rise up, and we'll do it 1,000 times again.
Let's all take a breath together. Thank you to all those who sent in photos to be added to the video. And I want to take this opportunity to just center us in this moment, in this time that we have together. Please get in a comfortable position and close or relax your eyes and shoulders. And take a deep breath. As you scan your body and your mind, what are you coming in with? What are you holding on to? Where do you feel tension in your body, or excitement, or nervousness? And take a breath. Take this time to set an intention for the coming semester. How do you want to be as we enter a new year? What impact do you want to have at ARC? And take 3 more breaths. Thank you for joining me in this space. So today's convocation and the theme for our next year is meeting the urgency of the moment, with an emphasis on being best practitioners. I ask that in an effort to advance the work of being best practitioners, that we do our best to be present as we engage in this important content together. Today, you will be hearing from our Student Senate President about their visions for equitable and inclusive campus, as well as our other Senate presidents. And Thomas will share his perspective on the equity imperative that lies ahead. A majority of our convocation together will be structured around our disproportionate impact project teams from 2019 and 2020. They will be sharing the foundations of their work and their findings, as well as recommendations that will help all of us meet the urgency of the moment. There will be breakout sessions, as we discussed in the all-campus emails. And I encourage you to join us for a deeper dive in the discussions of these important initiatives. Lastly, after our second break, we will have the presentation of the Ken Diebert Award for Adjunct Faculty of the Year with a special guest. And we'll close with a message from the Los Rios Community College District Board of Trustees President Dustin Johnson and our Chancellor Brian King. Without further ado, I welcome Naomi Dasari, our Student Senate President.
Good morning, everyone. I just want to make sure, can you guys all hear me? Okay. Normally, I'm used to people answering on this. Okay. Right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Naomi Dasari, and I'm a third-year student majoring in political science. This year, I'm serving as the Student Senate President of ARC. I bring you greetings on behalf of the members of the Student Senate, who, I might add, have been exemplary in their services and dedication towards the students of the ARC. I'm honored to have the opportunity to work with this group of people. I miss ARC. I miss our campus. I miss being in a classroom. I miss singing and practicing with my section in the music rooms. I miss playing cards with my classmates and complaining about the construction. I miss bumping into people around the campus, hugging, celebrating, laughing, and commiserating. Mostly though, I miss the sense of community that enveloped campus life. I'm not alone in this sentiment. Staff, faculty, and students. Last semester, you all did a remarkable job switching to remote learning in such an abrupt manner, giving up your time and having your personal spaces invaded. Thank you. Your dedication and creativity are awe-inspiring. But still, I reminisce about pre-corona college life. Obviously, things will be different this semester. We've had more time, practically, technologically, and mentally to prepare for online teaching and learning. The Student Senate too has had more time to prepare for operating remotely. Despite these preparations, this academic year will be difficult for our college community. On behalf of the ARC students, the Student Senate wishes to thank everyone for their patience as we are all learning to navigate this new world of online education, particularly with the difficulties students are facing in acquiring classroom materials and using unfamiliar technology. Many of our students will have to begin their classes without timely access to their textbooks, or in some cases, the Chromebooks on loan to them. I have no doubt, though, that our students will begin this semester strongly, despite the many obstacles. Since I have your attention, I hope, I would like to briefly share with you what ASB has been doing. Last term, ARC's ASB, together with the other student governments in our district, lobbied the California legislators on Senate Bill 291. The bill focuses on changing the financial aid packages offered to California's community college students to include the cost of living. That means books, food, housing, and transportation, like those offered to the UC and CSU students. Especially under the current economic conditions, college affordability has become an even more significant issue. At present, our Student Senate Basic Needs Committee is working on 2 separate basic needs projects. 1, an ASB scholarship that would prioritize aid towards undocumented non-DACA recipient students. And 2, a virtual advocacy event that would allow us to advocate online for community college-related legislature while also providing financial aid resources to our students. In closing, I wish to invite our student community to become involved with ASB leadership. Our student government is always looking to grow in size and diversity, something that has become more difficult during remote operations. You all have the opportunity to gain a greater understanding of the community college system and to develop valuable leadership skills along the way. Faculty, you are in a unique position. You know your students. You know their strengths and character. I ask for your help in identifying potential student leaders and encouraging them to learn more about ARC student government. I wish all of us a successful semester. There is so much to learn. The members of ASB are so grateful to be part of such an amazing learning community. Thank you. I now turn it over to our Academic Senate President.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our remote experience. My name is Elisa Shub. I use she or they pronouns, and I am serving currently as the Academic Senate President. And I wish we were together the way we used to be. I also miss being with you. I miss you all so much. I'd rather be fighting morning traffic to get to the campus this early and be standing up in front of everybody in the big room wearing ridiculously high heels like these, if it meant that we could all be here together. Today, we begin meeting the urgency of the moment. And as we saw in the video, this moment couldn't have come at a worse time, which is precisely what makes it urgent. I would like to acknowledge my privileges that enable me to speak to you here today. I have reliable enough internet. I have access to working technology. I have a home. I'm in good health. I am a white presenting cisgender hetero US citizen employed in higher education, serving in a position of relative power as a tenured faculty member. I'm also proud to be able to say that I'm an educator, which is something that we all here today have in common. I mention these privileges because it is through these lenses that I prepared for and view today's convocation. And these are the lenses through which I also view my students. But regardless of whatever lenses we come with, fulfilling our college mission requires us all to assume an equity lens. And to do this, I must recognize that not everyone has equal access. I must recognize that barriers may prevent you from getting what you need from this convocation. And therefore, going forward, I cannot assume your internet is reliable. It probably won't be for our students. I cannot assume you have access to technology. Our students may not either. I cannot assume that you are in a comfortable space, safe physical space. This is a real challenge for many of our students. And I cannot assume you are feeling well or that your family is safe, although I truly hope that is the case, as I hope will be the case for our students. I cannot assume in today's landscape that anything is okay, because it's not. I will also not assume that any of you would also feel empowered to come out here and express your thoughts freely among this community of educators, nor assume that you even feel a sense of community that I do being here. But I recognize that in my position, I am privileged and empowered to do and experience exactly that. I do, however, believe that each of us educators have power. I believe our college is collectively heading in the right direction, and that each of us individually has the personal power to make a difference in our students' lives. We have the power to make a difference in the lives of human beings whose lives, much like our own, have been upended in so many ways, devastating ways for our most vulnerable population. Our collective commitment to equity and social justice asks us to uphold the dignity and humanity of each individual we interact with. All of us here today have the power to make this happen by tearing down barriers and reaching out in our own ways to support our students, particularly our Black, African American, Native, and Latinx students and students of color. Throughout this convocation, you will be introduced to a lot of material that very thoughtful and dedicated people have taken a great deal of time to prepare. That material will cause you to think, what can I do? Hold on to that thought. What can I do? And then ask yourselves, what will I do? And then turn those thoughts into action. Right now, in the urgency of this moment, I will be using my power as an educator and my power as a human being to reach out across this physically distant remote divide and make human connections with those students who need us now possibly more than ever before. Please, fellow educators, embrace this moment with me. And now let us turn our attention to our classified Senate President.
Good morning. My name is Olga Prishbilov. I'm the Classified Senate President here at ARC. On behalf of the classified educators of ARC, I would like to welcome you to the fall 2020 semester. My message today for you is to be brave. We talk a lot about the voice that classified professionals have and whether we use that voice or not. I want us to take into a different situation. Let's imagine that you're going to a doctor's appointment with your kid, your elderly parent, somebody that you care and love for. And you go to the doctor and you know that if you don't ask the questions that you need the answers to, no one will. If you don't advocate for that person, no one will. And you will leave and you will regret not asking the question, and you will know that you don't have the answer. It's very similar in our campus governance on our campus. We all come with different perspectives that are very important. We come from different perspectives of what our students need from us. We ask students different questions. So then it is up to us to bring the questions to the room where they need to be. And it is up for us to be brave and to ask the necessary questions and to demand the answers. So my thought for you today is to be brave. Thank you. And at this point, I'd like to welcome President Thomas Green.
Thanks, Olga. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to ARC's first virtual convocation. Before I begin, I want to express my appreciation to all those who contributed to today's event, with a special thanks to Nick, Scott Crow, and each of today's presenters and facilitators. We face many firsts these days. The video we just watched was a powerful reminder of the wide-ranging impact of what we've experienced over the last several months, both as individuals and as a community. The fear, anger, and outrage, the heartbreak, as well as the joy, the love and compassion for one another, and hope, always hope. I want to begin by thanking all of you, staff, faculty, administrators, and our students who have and continue to rise up in responding to the closing of our campuses in this forced experiment of complete online operations. I'm humbled by how you face the challenges of today's reality head on with such ingenuity and empathy. I recognize that many of the challenges we face continue to defy a solution, and understand the frustration and helplessness that many of you feel in your efforts to support our students and one another under such adverse conditions. And also, it's not lost on me that all of what I just mentioned is taking place on top of and from the context of each of you are contending with outside of work. The forced isolation and fear of contracting COVID, the lack of separation of your work with that of having to be a parent, caretaker, and/or son or daughter of an aging or ill parent or other loved one, the deep and longstanding pain of racism that overflowed onto and into the national consciousness with the murder of George Floyd, the threat to our fellow queer and trans and undocumented brothers and sisters, and I guess I should add, also contending with smoke and wildfires. And I too have been impacted by today's difficult realities. I lost my dad about a month ago. And while really fortunate to have the opportunity to say goodbye to him, I did so over Zoom while my brother streamed video from the window outside my dad's room at the nursing home. And ironically, so I'm sitting with my own grief is really helping me feel and appreciate the fear and the uncertainty and the pain and loss others are facing right now, especially our students. And as a consequence, I'm really coming to more fully recognize how truly fortunate and privileged I am. And while recognizing the many challenges we face, I'll tell you, I am so humbled by the sheer grit and tenacity of our students. I mean, they're coming to us next week with great hopes for their future, all the while contending courageously with the challenges of a depth and breadth I can only imagine. I mean, their determination, it centers me. It shines a bright light on the promises we made to them. It's captured in our mission, vision, and our commitment to social justice and equity, and our most important strategic goal, to put students first, to put them first. Now more than ever, our students need us, and they need more from us. Several years ago, we embarked on a journey to redesign the college to fulfill these promises to our students. All students, recognizing that this institution was originally constructed by people who look like me, for people who look like me. And while I'm encouraged by the progress we've made over the last several years in re-architecting the institution to reflect and equitably serve all of our students and employees, all that we've experienced over the last several months, the overwhelming reality of COVID has moved me to see the urgency of this moment in time and the critical need to accelerate our work. It's also helped me to see and take ownership of the fact that there have been times when I've been complacent, where in my role, I did not hold myself more accountable for moving our redesign work forward with greater urgency and focus. Our institutional culture, while having encouraged and supported greater levels of participation in this important work, has continued to allow for both spectators and participants. This is no longer the case. Today, I'm calling on each of us to rise up in response to the urgency of this moment. Guided by the outstanding work of our DI project teams and our institutional equity plan, today serves as a call to action. Each of us as educators is being called upon to take one or more specific actions above and beyond our current efforts to close the equity gap for our most disproportionately impacted students at ARC. Our Black, African American, Latinx, and Native American students, and to do so not at the expense of our other students. To help us focus our efforts and gauge the collective impact over the course of this year, the four Los Rios College presidents came together and identified two metrics that are strong leading indicators of overall student completion and success. For the first of these metrics, we also established a district-wide goal that we intend to reach in the course of 1 year. I want to quickly walk you through each of these at a high level, but I don't want you to get distracted by or feel like you need to remember all the percentages and statistics. Rather, our researchers, Yuj, Chris, Jonathan, they did an awesome job in helping us translate these stats into the number of students, the number of human lives we need to positively impact in order to achieve our shared goals of closing the long-standing equity gaps at ARC. If nothing else, these metrics help us focus our efforts and hold ourselves more accountable to the work to which we've committed. So the first metric is course success, with the goal of reaching a 73% course success rate across our district in 1 year. Now, because ARC's overall course success rate currently exceeds 73%, we have established an additional ARC specific goal of 76%. So here's how you read the slide. Last fall, 2,382 Black African American students attended ARC. These students succeeded in approximately 61% of their classes. This roughly translates to about 1,452 students who quote unquote succeeded. Now, in order to reach the district-wide goal of 73% course success and close the equity gap between 61% and 73%, we need to positively impact the lives of 287 more Black African American students. Likewise, in order for us to reach the ARC goal of 76% course success and close the equity gap between 61% and 76%, we need to positively impact the lives of an additional 287 plus 81, or 358 Black African American students. Now, you can walk through the slide the same way for our Latinx students, whereas you might notice there's almost no equity gap between the fall 19 course success rate of 72.9% and the district-wide goal of 73%. However, when you're looking at the ARC goal, we need to positively impact the lives of 295 additional Latinx students, 10 plus 285, in order to close the equity gap associated with the ARC goal of 76%. And then we read the slide the same way for our Native American students, wherein we need to positively impact the lives of 12 students to reach our ARC goal. Now, again, please don't focus too much on the percentages. The most important takeaway from this slide is to see the additional number of students we need to positively impact beyond that which we've done historically to address the equity gap in course success. And when you consider the actual number of students, this goal is attainable. Now, I'm going to switch to the second slide, which is the second district-wide metric. It's the number of first-time students, those starting college. So let's move that, there we go. Those starting college for the first time who complete English 300 and a transfer level math course during their first year. Again, it's a metric that serves as a strong leading indicator associated with the student's timely completion of their overall educational goal. Now, let's start by looking at this from the perspective of all 4,505 first-time students who attended ARC last year. Now, of these new students, 981, or 22%, enrolled in English 300, freshman comp, and a transfer level math course during their first year. Of these 981 students, 537, or 55%, succeeded with a grade or C or better in both of those courses. Now, those 537 students represent 12% of the 4,505 first-time students from last year. We call that 12% number throughput. Now, moving down one line, we see that 321 first-time Black African-American students attended ARC last year. Of those, 62, or 19%, enrolled in English 300 and a transfer level math course during their first year. Of these 62 students, 22, or 36%, succeeded in both their English and math course. Those 22 students represent 7% of all of the 321 Black African-American first-time students enrolled last year. Again, 7% number is what we call throughput. Now, in order to close the throughput gap for first-time Black African-American students, 16 more students need to both enroll and succeed in English 300 and a transfer level math course. So if we kind of look one line below and at the 1,545 first-time Latinx students who attended ARC last year, 18% enrolled in English 300 and a transfer level math course in the first year. This 18% is 4% less than the 22%, 22 minus 4 equals 18, of all first-time students enrolled in English 300 and transfer level math. As such, that 4%, or the 54 students it represents, is considered the enrollment gap. Likewise, if we move just to the right, the 47% of the Latinx students who succeeded in both courses is 8% less than the 55% of all first-time students who succeeded. This is considered the success gap. Now, all right, I'm done. But it takes a lot, it's a lot over Zoom in such a really short period of time. So the only reason I wanted to share all this with you, if you take nothing else away from all these two slides, is to recognize that closing the equity gaps are within our reach. I mean, just think about it. If all of us on this call were able to positively impact the success of just one additional student, we would close all of the equity gaps at the college and increase the success of all students at the same time. Now, moving forward, we'll be unpacking this information, making it more accessible, and localized to help clarify and focus the strategies and actions divisions, departments, and individuals will take to achieve these goals, as well as help guide the needed structural and policy changes at the college and district toward that same end. We'll also be providing our teaching faculty with access to their individual equity reports for all of their classes. Now, I want to end by emphasizing two things. First, where each of us in our own unique roles has the power to make change, we commit to doing so in an explicit and focused way to close the equity gap for our students. Again, like I said, there's no more room for being a spectator at ARC in this work. And while nobody has to do everything, we're calling on everyone to do something. Now, I recognize that every day you go above and beyond for our students. And yes, I'm asking each of us, even during these challenging times, to do even more. And I do so because our students need us more than ever. And the second and last thing I want to emphasize is something I shared with you at our last convocation. Each of you is truly extraordinary. And because of this, I know that together our ARC community will rise up to the challenge of these times. Thank you again for allowing me to serve alongside each of you and share in what has and will continue to be an extraordinary and fulfilling journey. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. I'd now like to welcome Pam Chow and the Disproportionate Impact Project team from 2019 and 2020. Thanks, Pam. Pam, if you can unmute.
Did the clicking go through this time? Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. All right. So let's take a deep breath in and out. That was a powerful message we just took in from President Green. And those were powerful narratives we saw earlier in the opening of the convocation. Another breath to ground us in today, in, out. It's Friday, August 21st, 2020, and the ARC convocation for the 2020-21 academic year. Hello, I am really happy to be here with you. Welcome, ARC community. I'm Pam Chow. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I teach sociology and I coordinate our Equity Action Institute. It's my honor to introduce this next part of our convocation and to be in community with all you amazing people. 5 years ago, we were given the opportunity to rethink and reshape community college education. We were charged with closing the opportunity gap experienced by specific student populations through creating student-ready colleges staffed with equitable practitioners. We accepted Thomas Green's challenge to redesign American River College as a student-first, equity-focused, and solution-centered institution. We leapt into change. We have held firm with the basic principles we started the redesign process with. We are redesigning systems and creating a cultural shift. We are in a learning zone that can maximize our discomfort, and that's okay. We have to think outside of our socialized messages about identity, power, education, and success. Groups must be represented and speak for themselves. Right? As illustrated by the statement, there is nothing for us without us. Mindful of deficit thinking. We learn about the systemic and historical under-resourcing of communities that have led to equity gaps. We practice inquiry through questioning ourselves, our practices, our institutions, and then go back and question again. Oh, I'm sorry, I've got the wrong piece. Okay. All right. We are focused on equity. Okay. We use data and seek to unpack the narratives around the data. We are flexible. We bring ourselves to the process and we focus on ourselves as best practitioners. We will make mistakes and we learn from them. This is a process with a goal, and we do transformative work. All right. And so I apologize, I skipped a piece back in there. Okay. And so I want to give a little bit of background of the DI project teamwork. The first phase of disproportionate impact project teamwork was implemented for the 2019-2020 academic year to gather information and recommendations for practice for our most disproportionately impacted student populations in order to equitize student success. The disproportionate impact or DI project teams included students, classified management, faculty educators, and community members from each population. The three project teams were the Native American DI team, African American DI team, and the Latinx DI team. Our second phase is taking place this year with the chartering, formation, and implementation of the Asian Pacific Islander and Desi American DI project team with possible name shifts, and the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer or questioning, intersex, and asexual or ally DI project team. This is a historic moment in our institution where our ARC DI teams are finding solutions and asking questions in community for community. Last spring, to effectively do the work requested, the Disproportionate Impact Project team came together to create a DI survey to better understand the students' experiences at ARC. The DI team based their survey, the Student Experience Survey, SES, on ARC's climate survey and the works of other scholars, researchers who also examine racial ethnic theories, practices around student development, and student success. Considering the COVID pandemic and sudden campus closure in spring, it was wonderful that almost 900 ARC students who self-identified as having African American, Native American, or Latinx ancestry as their racial or one of their multiracial identities on their CCC Apply application and were enrolled in spring 2020 responded to the survey. The recommendations of the DI team stem from historical literature reviews, theoretical frameworks, ARC institutional data, and SES survey results. We come together now in the urgency of our moment, ready for action in a remote semester that is challenging most of us in ways we never expected and is exacerbating existing inequities for our students. To help us navigate, representatives from last year's DI project teams are with us to highlight data, information, and insights so we can create more equitable relationships with and spaces for our disproportionately impacted and under-resourced students. We will continue this conversation in our breakout sessions that follow this panel. I just want to backtrack for a moment, right? And what I wanted to mention was that as part of the focus on equity work, right, I missed the slide piece that said we are race conscious and we talk about race in the context of power. We expand by including other groups and contexts, including tribal consciousness, and the fact that we go above and beyond that and we work in community and as a community. Thank you for doing that, Nick. I appreciate that, okay? And so if we can go back to the introduction of the panel, then I'll do a brief introduction of our panel, and then each panelist will introduce themselves as part of the presentation. There's a lot of context and content in this section, right? First, a reminder that content resources are posted on our Convocation website for everyone to access. We also ask that folks who use the chat to keep their comments connected to the panel content. And so first, our Native American Disproportionate Impact Project Team panelists are Jesus Valle, Professor of English and Director of Native American Resource Center, Tona Miranda, the ADSPA for the Native American Resource Center, Pauline Ghost, our student staff at the Native American Resource Center and the EOP&S program. For our Latinx DI project team, our panelists are Ricardo Caton, Professor of History, Alejandra Fernandez Garcia, Pride Program Specialist, and Maria Elena Sepulveda, an ARC graduate and a former student of mine as well. Our African American DI team panelists are Dr. Judy Mays, Counselor Co-Coordinator of the Umoja Saku Learning Community, Dr. Tara Reynolds, Faculty Coordinator, Umoja Saku BSU Club Advisor, and Denzel Phoenix, ARC student and a former student of mine, Umoja Saku BSU Club President. So I'd like to hand this off right now, okay, to the Native American DI Impact Project team.
Okay, thank you very much, Pam. And again, for those of you who may be joining the convocation a little late, I'm Professor Jesus Valle. I teach in English, direct the Native American Resource Center, and I'm also identified by the tribes that I belong to. So I am Yoeme, I'm Carrizo, I'm Isleta, and I'm Apache. Those are my native nations. I'm going to ask Pauline Ghost here to go ahead and introduce herself, and then Tona to introduce herself.
Hello, I'm Pauline Ghost Perez, and I work at the Native American Resource Center, as well as EOP&S. I'm currently attending ARC as a student as well, and my goal is to transfer to Sac State and join their psychology program. My ultimate goal is to be a foster child counselor.
Thank you very much, Pauline. Tonantzin?
Hello, everyone. My name is Tonantzin Miranda. I am staff at the Native American Resource Center, and I come from the Blackfoot, Yaqui, and Otomi tribes. Thank you so much for having us.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to jump into screen share here, and hopefully we can make this work. And if not, Nick, I will be contacting you. All right, here we go. So what you see on the screen here, this is the cover sheet for the Native American Disproportionate Impact Study. And this is a couple of our Native American students at American River College in our Native American Resource Center. It's Noelia and Athena. And doing the study was really important as a process, as a community, as a discourse, and as a dialogue. And so I want to talk a little bit first about, who had input into this. It wasn't just, myself. It was Christina Casper-Denman. It was Tonantzin, Miranda, Melinda, Adams over at UC Davis, Ricardo Torres from CSUS, and Roderick Agmanag, as well as Pauline Ghost, and then some of our local data analysis done by Kalo and Yuj Shimizu. And so, I really like that Thomas highlighted some of the data. And so I'm gonna, kind of point to this, and I'm speaking here from the document, and you should have access to the document because I think it's really important that we look at the document for what the document says and how it speaks. And so I want to point out that we're placing the blame for the outcomes of the disproportionate impact squarely on the education system and all of its manifestations to the experience of the student, that we're taking a system approach. We're looking how has the system that has rolled across Native America for the last 500 years directly impacted the lived experience of our present day Native American students. And so something to understand is that it is impossible to describe in this report the true scale of human suffering that has been brought on by colonization in this hemisphere. And something that we need to keep in mind when thinking about colonization and its impacts is that colonization, it's not one monolithic thing that happens in one place and at one time. The entire hemisphere is Native America, full of indigenous sovereign nations and communities. And each of these communities was contacted and impacted and colonized in profoundly different ways, and some to the point where they're currently not colonized, for example, in Amazonia in Brazil. And so colonization is a wheel turning across the hemisphere. And so it is both a moment and a lengthy process. It is the direct genocide as well as the genocide of the mind and the spirit. And the endpoint is the attempted erasure of indigenous people from the hemisphere, and if not the physical erasure, then certainly the erasure of native identity and the sense of community. And so I'd like to introduce the idea to you, this term, detribalization. The notion is to detribalize people, to assimilate, and to do away with native individuals. So because we are here in California and in this specific location, I have to point out that the mission system in California was a direct result of the Spanish incursion here into native sovereign territory. And what this did is created basically an enslavement system for native people right here in this region. It was tremendously horrible for the human beings that lived through this, for the native people, and then for their survivors, right, for the descendants. And we're not talking that long ago. And I mention this because all of this informs how the youth of our local Native nations may perceive American River College, may look at the landscape of our education. Moving into the Gold Rush era in California, so-called, you have California becoming a state, and the first laws in California that were enacted so that Native American people could be enslaved and put to work in mines. And the laws were written specifically so that Native children could be stolen and taken and enslaved. And there were multiple laws that were passed in order to make that happen. And so there's a history of direct genocide in this area and in this region. There were campaigns of extermination against California Native people. So the killing of Indians was a daily occurrence reported, California's head of Indian Affairs. And the idea was that they eventually were simply, that they were going to be completely exterminated. And so I mention this again because there's a tragic and horrible history that lives in the present day consciousness of every single Native American person that steps into the halls of American River College. Moving forward in time, the federal government shifted its approach and created a boarding school system. And within this boarding school system, it was compulsory that children were stolen from their families, their tribes, their ways of life, and they were put into the boarding schools far away from their families. And here they were brutalized. They were stripped of their language. Their hair was cut. They were given new Anglo names, and they were harshly missionized. And sexual abuse is rampant. This is well documented in the historical record. So the emphasis was, the stated goal was to kill the Indian and to save the man. So I'm going to move forward a little bit because there's a lot that I could say about history, but what I'm trying to do is kind of lay a foundation for understanding why it is that we see at a system level approach, what is the system doing for our Native American students? How is the system reinforcing in a positive way a contemporary education to our Native students, one that empowers them in their tribalism? So within the report, we looked at various models, different approaches, different lenses. The American Indian College Fund recommends to solve the problem of equity in higher education, one must look at underlying causes. Make no mistake, it is the invisibility and this twin opposite, the romanticizing and the dehumanizing of Native peoples. And so this has been centuries in the making, right? The erasure. And so when we look at barriers and demotivators at American River College, we look at ideas such as our Native students are surrounded on colonial culture on all sides. We look at direct racism and attitudes towards Native Americans, misunderstandings about us, the loss of culture, the sports mascots that to this very day, even though the tide is turning slowly, still continue to mimic and mock us in large form. We look at the relative invisibility of Native Americans on campus, the lack of formal recognition through termination of federal trust responsibility, the illegal market of Native stolen goods that's out there at a global scale, the hypersexualization of Native women as evidenced by the Pocahontas myth, which contributes to the widespread epidemic of violence against Native women, and so forth. All of this is a tremendous backdrop, embedded language, embedded racism within language, right, is also a big one. That informs the experience. Now, I'm going to fast forward again in the interest of time to looking at what can you do, because I think it's important that we start to turn our attention to potential recommendations and ideas for looking at this in a different way. So I want to introduce to you this notion of the sovereignty frame. There were two large recommendations to come out of the DI study. One was that we shift to a sovereignty frame. Native American folks on campus have been put into the racial bucket, but we're not a race. In fact, the notion of sovereignty, that is the relationship, the political relationship and treaty relationship, is established in the United States Constitution and further affirmed by the United States Supreme Court, that tribes possess a nationhood status and retain inherent powers of self-government. And along with that, then the federal government has trust responsibility and legal obligations, and these extend across a number of areas. And so according to the National Congress of American Indians, the areas that impact would be the culture of tribal governance, political relationships, tribes as nations. And this frame shift, right, to sovereignty moves us out of the race bucket. But it's true that we can still have to contend with the complexities of race within tribe and tribe within race. But when we start to look at our Native students as citizens of their sovereign nations, their sovereign tribal nations, it starts to shift the frame. So one of the principal recommendations is to shift to a sovereignty frame, and along with that, to establish the Office of Tribal Relations, so that we can start to look at our relationship between ARC and all of the Native nations, both local and beyond, and how the student is impacted within that relationship. So what does this mean for practitioners at American River College? So this prompts us to ask different questions in new ways when we start to think about serving tribal citizens. For instance, how is our financial aid department serving tribal citizens of nations specifically? Do we have a specialist to work with Native nations, right? Do we have a tribal pathway program for citizens of local Native nations? Are we doing collaborative data gathering with local Native nations that is, participatory, culturally informed, culturally appropriate? And then how do we look at tribal citizens as proportionally significant relative to their tribes and not as just a small number, which is typically excluded from most data reports? So for instance, let's say we're looking at the Hupa tribe and it turns out that ARC ends up with 8 or 10 students from Hupa. That could be 80% of their graduating class, which is an outsized proportion of their tribal future, the future of their Native nation. This is not something to be taken lightly. So we can continue to ask many different questions, and I'm prompting you all right now to start to ask different questions in different ways and to shift your thinking to the sovereignty frame. And so, for instance, how do Native values inform how we teach at ARC, and how does that reinforce the experiences of our tribal citizens? How do your courses reinforce or negate tribal historical narratives or lived accounts of tribal citizens? I'm going to skip forward here. As an instructor, how am I aware of my historical identity and how it informs the Native students that I have in my classes, the tribal citizens? And then what is the physical relationship between the physical plant of ARC and the tribal nations? As Melissa Tabaya was suggesting earlier, this notion of earth consciousness. How do we have heritage displays in Native gardens? How do we honor sacred sites on campus? What does our environmental preservation and sustainability look like in partnership with tribal nations, and so forth? So I'm going to provide you some quick recommendations here, some general best practices to support tribal citizens in the classroom. Cultivate an awareness of the facts of Native sovereignty and be unafraid to voice the awareness. Give space to authentic tribal voices. That is, use textbooks, movies, posts, videos, and accounts from American Indians themselves, and be very skeptical of colonial and anthropological accounts. And whether these are fiction or nonfiction, if it's written by others about Indians, it's better, it's preferential to have it in our own Native voices. Realize that the voices of tribal citizens are not monolithic. We are incredibly diverse, each within our own Native nations. Use the ARC land acknowledgement statement when possible, and in your syllabi. I've included it here within this resource, and you will have access to this resource. And then I've included the what is this and why it is important, including the resource for the Native land .california.ca. Support campus initiatives built on the sovereignty frame. If you have students who are tribal citizens, let them know you recognize them as such. For instance, include in your syllabi the following statement: this instructor supports the uniqueness of American Indian tribal citizens in tribal sovereignty. If you're a Native American, enrolled or non-enrolled, and would like to connect with further support, and then refer them to our Native American Resource Center. Become familiar with what the ARC Native American Resource Center offers. There is a video tour that you can find at the end of my email handle. Show tribal citizens that you really care about their reality and their hardships. Develop a personal plan of development that focuses on understanding how your personal identity impacts your understanding of anti-racism and anti-tribalism. Familiarize yourself with Native American support organizations, Native American Health Center, Northern Valley Indian Health, Chappaday Indian Health. Avoid objectifying American Indian tribal citizens. Don't single out tribal citizens in front of the class to speak for their people. Tribal citizens may not want to be identified, and you will not, I guarantee you, not be able to identify tribal citizens by looking at them. And the realities of Native identity is going to clash with your internalized ideas from movies, media, K through 12 education of what Indians are supposed to look like, quote unquote, or act like, or the values that the general population, general popular culture thinks that we should hold. I want to encourage you to walk students over, if you can, to the center when we get back into in-person or in distance modality. Refer them to me, and avoid starting interactions and conversations with American Indians in ways that put your experiences first, or that are intrusive or judgmental, such as, I read this book once, or I saw this movie, very tragic, or, how much Indian are you, or, what's your tribe? I used to live in Arizona. That's centering you, but, do reach out in a way that, I noticed you mentioned that you were a tribal citizen. Thanks for sharing that. If it's okay with you, I'd like to connect with you, connect you with the campus resource and support for Native American students. And then understand and realize that not all tribal citizens need or want additional support, and that is totally okay. In our culture, we respect the wishes of the individual, and after 2 times, if they don't want service or support, please respect their individual path. So I'm going to say that much. You can always contact me for more information, and I'm going to turn it back over to Pam.
Thank you so much, Jesus. Right. Sovereignty is such an important paradigm shift, and there's so much for all of us to learn. Right. Next up is Ricardo, Alejandra, and Maria Elena to report on the Latinx DI project team.
Okay, hello. Says that the host has stopped my my video. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Pam. Thank you, everyone, for being here today. Indeed, I'm Ricardo Caton. I am a professor of history. I teach Latin American history, Chicano history, and world history. And I'm here with my colleague, Alejandra Fernandez Garcia, and our fellow student or former student, Maria Elena Sepulveda, who together we will discuss the key aspects of this report that we did, which we titled Mejorando ARC para nuestras comunidades. And that translates to bettering ARC for our communities. And we specifically made this comunidades or rural comunidades in the plural, because indeed there is no Latinx comunidad or community in the singular. We are very much diverse as well, just like Jesus mentioned earlier in terms of Native American individuals. Certainly Latinx individuals are very diverse, and it is that diversity and complexity that we wanted to highlight as well throughout this report. If we could go to our next slide, please. So from where do Latin American people come from? From where do the Latinx people come? Well, it's throughout the world. Indeed, these are slides that I use in my courses, be it Latin American, Chicano, or my world history courses, when I emphasize who are the peoples that came together in one way or another to form the Latin American peoples in Latin America as we know it. And it's very much peoples not only from the Americas, indigenous peoples of the Americas, the Western Hemisphere, but certainly we have peoples coming from Asia. We have peoples coming from Africa. And certainly we have peoples coming from Europe. So when it comes to the Latin American peoples, the Latinx peoples, it's very much peoples from throughout the world. So here again, we're not talking about some homogeneous, some monolithic individual group. This is very much groups and communities we're talking about. Next slide, please. I also want to highlight or emphasize here terms. And terms are vital because indeed we want to have a sense of who it is we're speaking of when we use such terms. And what I want to do here is just sort of clarify some things when it comes to the use of these terms. And first and foremost, let us clarify the term American. Now, American is often appropriated to reference someone from the United States of America. Certainly, this is something that individuals from the United States have even implemented outside of the United States as well, to have individuals throughout the world believe as well that when you say America or American, it means the United States. But we know that this is actually false, because indeed, when it comes to America, we're talking about the Western Hemisphere. From Canada in the north to Argentina in the south and into the Caribbean, that is America, that's America. And anyone who comes from those regions of America are American. So that is key there, that indeed we need to start moving away from this notion that American means exclusively the peoples of the United States. Latin American or Latino, these terms refer to peoples originating or having roots in Latin America itself. So what is Latin America? Geographically speaking, Latin America will begin, or at least you can look at it in terms of Mexico in the north, down to Argentina in the south, into South America, and the Caribbean region. Certainly, those would be included into the Latin America scope. So those would be peoples coming from Latin America would be officially Latino. Now, what about this term Latinx? I'm sure you've heard now this term quite a bit, Latinx. Latinx is a fairly new term, and it's primarily a term that has arisen and has especially been important in academia, in academic circles. It's really been fully accepted or embraced outside of academia, but it's very much a term that has become a key term within academic circles. And it's a way of referring to people of Latin American descent that acknowledges multiple genders and non-binary genders. So moving away from the Latino, Latina, to this Latinx, again, non-binary term. Hispanic. Hispanic originates, it's about people that originate from Spain itself. So this Hispanic is by no means some umbrella term to refer to all peoples of Latinx background. It is exclusive to refer to individuals who may have, in one way or another, roots coming from Spain, but it's specific to Spain. And for that reason, it's quite problematic when trying to use this term to refer to it, again, as this larger umbrella term for Latin American peoples. All right, next slide, please. Now, Chicano. Chicano is a self-identifying political term that emerged among Mexican Americans in the 1960s, particularly used in the US Southwest and California. It was very much a term of self-empowerment, but again, it was particularly centered in the Southwest and California regions and continues to this day. Indeed, if you were to travel, let us say, to the East Coast, Chicano is not necessarily a term that is heard on a regular basis, as opposed to if you're here in California or somewhere in the US Southwest. Chicanx, like Latinx, is a way of referring to people of Mexican descent that acknowledge multiple genders and non-binary genders. Now, hyphenation. Hyphenation is very much historical. And this has been a necessity, if you will, that was actually implemented by individuals who thought of themselves as quote unquote true Americans. And that tended to be the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, the notion that they were true Americans and that anyone else who did not fit that category of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant had to hyphenate themselves. So historically, we know, for example, of the idea of the Italian American or the Irish American, and certainly that hyphenation continues to this day. But certainly this hyphenating is just a reminder of that idea that you are not fully accepted as a true quote unquote American in this country. Now, intersectionality, and this was vital to emphasize in our report, the complexity when it comes to Latinx individuals. Our identities are multidimensional, and complex. If we do not consider the intersecting identities of our students, we are very much repeating the systems of oppression we are seeking to dismantle. So if we're truly serious about serving our DI groups, and in particular in this case, our Latinx individuals, then certainly, right, we have to look at the multidimensional and complex aspects of their lives and of their identities. Next slide, please. I will now turn it to my colleague, Alejandra.
Thank you, Ricardo. So the Latinx DI team acknowledges and wants to center that we do not want equity and liberation for some of our scholars. We want equity and liberation for all of our scholars. So in order for our work to be effective, in order for our work to be transformative, it is critical that our work is intersectional and informed by the theory of intersectionality by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, right, which says that we are multi-dimensional complex people, and that we must study and understand and be critical of the intersections of our identities to understand how different forms of oppression intersect with each other, right, and how these impact our scholars navigating the world, right? And so we can see by this graphic on the right, the multi-dimensional aspects of our identity, right? And where we might hold multiple marginalized identities and where we might hold privilege in some of those identities, right? So the great Audre Lorde sums it up perfectly when she says there's no such thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives.
Thank you, Alejandro. Appreciate that. Next slide, yes. Okay, the theories that we incorporated when writing our report, a key certainly was critical race theory. Critical race theory in education provides researchers the ability to examine how multiple forms of repression can intersect within the lives of people of color, manifest in our daily experiences to mediate our education. We're fully aware that this idea of race, even though it's a social construction, it very much has real effects in everything that we do and in every aspect of our lives, and certainly in every aspect of the education process, including certainly here at ARC. A theoretical branch extending from critical race theory is Latinx critical race theory, or LatCrit, which examines the experiences unique to the Latinx community, such as immigration status, language, ethnicity, and culture. So now we use LatCrit to go a little further into how race, and in addition to race, immigration status, language, ethnicity, culture, all play a role in how that affects certainly the success of those who are trying to succeed here. See. Next slide, please. Community action research. Community action research is an alternative research method that So La Comunidad de ARC, which is our affinity group here at American River College, and Latinx students utilize CAR to create and conduct an informal student survey to meet an administration's request for statistics that go beyond the ARC Puente program. So certainly we have numbers in terms of success rates and so forth for those students who belong to our Puente program, but we wanted to go further and try to get a sense of our Latinx students beyond the ARC program, Puente program. And of course, intersectionality theory, as my colleague Alej explained earlier, that was also vital to emphasize that complexity, the intersectionality. Next slide, please.
So as we said in the beginning, right, we intentionally named our report, Mejorando ARC para nuestras comunidades, plural, right, to acknowledge that there are communities within our communities, correct? So we really want to emphasize the message that Latinx scholars are not monolithic, they are multidimensional and they are complex. And we want to repeat that again and again so that it could be very much heard and centered. So we want folks to consider the following figures, right? Across our state of California and our California community college system, right? 70% of trans and queer or LGBTQIA plus students also identify as students of color, right? Of the 115 California community colleges that we have across our state, ARC is only one of 6 Pride centers in the state. So we really want to challenge the fact that there is very little data on this particular population of scholars, and to really pose the question, how are we meeting these scholars where they're at? What are their specific needs? And how are we supporting them? Next slide. And so another figure that we want folks to consider, right, is that 80% of undocumented students attend California community colleges or attend community college, right? And we want to make a very, very important note that while not all undocumented students are Latinx, right? Undocumented people come from all over the world across many different races and ethnicities. And so we want to also highlight that although undocumented people, right, pay taxes through what's called an I-10 number, according to the IRS, I-10 filers pay over $9 billion annually in payroll taxes. And yet undocumented students cannot access much of the financial aid that many other students are able to access in order to fund their journeys and careers in higher education. And so again, we ask, how are we meeting these scholars where they are at? How are we supporting them? Thank you. Next slide.
Thank you. For the sake of time, if we could actually move, this is all part of the information that you'll find in our report, but I'd like to move forward. If we could go to the next slide as well. Okay, the effects. So how are our current conditions affecting our students? Let us put COVID-19 and realize that COVID-19 is having a major impact, certainly on our Latinx individuals, our Latinx students, and certainly their families. So as we move into this semester, please, by all means, stop to think about how this COVID-19 pandemic is very much affecting those students who are coming in. And with that, keep that in mind in terms of how you structure your syllabus, how you word your syllabus, and your particular policies for your course as we move through the semester. So with that, I'll leave it there. But certainly, I hope that we can continue this conversation as we go throughout the semester, because this is vital work that needs to be done. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. And I know that we have a resource sheet up from each of the DI teams on the convocation sheet that will help us with some of the actions that we can all take. And thank you. You highlight such important distinctions within the Latinx identity and the complicated intersections we need to understand. I look forward to the ways we can embrace the complexity. All right. Next is the African American Black DI team with, and so I'll pass it on to Judy and Tara and Denzel.
Thank you, Pam. Good morning. My name is Dr. Judy Mays, and I'm a counselor on campus, as well as one of the coordinators of the Umoja Saku Learning Community, which seeks to provide a culturally relevant educational experience for Black and African American students at ARC. Our team set out to answer the question, what do Black and African American students need to be successful at ARC? And our task today is to tell the story centered around this question. To best understand the story of Black and African American students, it is important to provide some context, which begins with our history in this country. I think it fits with today's convocation theme, meeting the urgency of the moment. It seems that the history of African Americans in the US is difficult for most to hear about because it is not truly reflected in the history books that we find in our K-12 school system. It is apparently so painful, so shameful, that one must wait until college before being taught the truth about the story of African Americans in the US. Thus, the true history remains unknown to many, unless they opt to take it. Our history in this country begins in the early 1600s with the onset of the transatlantic slave trade. This is where Africans were captured in their homeland, sold to Europeans, shoved into the bowels of ships, and endured a 2 to 3 month voyage from Africa to the Americas. In this country, African people were then bought and sold as property and became the labor force that fueled the Southern economy. The forced labor was degrading, torturous, and traumatizing. Some sought refuge and escaped to the north. To discourage this, though, laws were enacted to ensure that the South would not lose its economic engine. Laws that provided rewards for captured slaves and laws that made it illegal to educate enslaved Africans. These harsh conditions would exist for nearly 250 years until the end of the American Civil War. It is important to note that not all Black people in the US are descendants of enslaved Africans. There are many people of the African diaspora, as well as immigrants from various countries in Africa, living in the US and attending ARC. However, no matter where people of African descent hail from, we absolutely have a common bond. We are all members of the lowest racial caste system that exists in this country and across the planet. A caste system that ascribes those with darker skin to be the least intelligent, the least worthy, and the most despised. Next slide, please. One could actually say that the period of time in which slavery existed is the only time in this country's history that Black lives mattered. Once the price tags were removed from our foreheads, we lost our value. We were no longer someone's property, and we were begrudgingly granted the rights of citizenship, including, finally, the right to be educated. However, many of the privileges that come with citizenship, including education, have always been something that we have still had to fight for and strive to achieve. Since the end of the American Civil War in 1865 and the abolishment of slavery, we have been subjected to overt as well as covert laws and other deliberate and intentional acts to ensure our continued subjugation and to keep us in our place, or in any place, as long as we would not have equal footing with whites. Next slide, please. These overt laws and other deliberate acts would include Black codes, laws used to ensure Blacks were a source of cheap labor, Jim Crow laws, forced racial segregation and discrimination, the Ku Klux Klan, a white supremacist hate group, lynching and other acts of hatred and terrorism, negative racial stereotyping through minstrel shows, advertising, radio, television, etc. Miscegenation laws, which prevented Blacks and whites from intermarrying. Next slide, please. There were numerous race riots across the country in major cities, being denied the right to vote and other voter suppression tactics, redlining, the practice among banks and real estate agencies to ensure Blacks were concentrated in certain areas of town, the dismantling of affirmative action laws, racial profiling, excessive sentencing laws targeting Blacks and leading to mass incarceration. These are some of the more salient examples. There are others which are too numerous to name. The point of our historical perspective is to provide the backdrop for understanding where we are today and why we must claim that Black lives matter. There is nothing wrong with Black students. What's wrong is the racial caste system that sees Blacks as not good enough, not smart enough, and as people to be feared. These beliefs are unfortunately ingrained into the fabric of this society and are reflected in the fact that African Americans are at or near the bottom rung on almost every measure of success in most educational institutions. As Dr. Green has said many times, institutions are perfectly designed to get the results that they are getting. So now Dr. Tara Reynolds will tell you about what African American students say they need to feel that they matter and what they need in order to be successful at ARC. Tara?
Thank you, Dr. Mays. If Dr. Mays didn't just give you 400 years of reasons why Black lives should matter, here's what the literature says. During the literature review, we studied 3 theoretical concepts: racial identity development theory, critical race theory, and marginality and mattering. I'm not going to go into too much detail, as you can read it in our report. But together they provided the context needed to understand the experiences of African American students in educational systems. Together they helped us understand how we may better serve African American students and impact their success. I want to take a second and highlight Schlossberg's work on marginality and mattering. Why should Black lives matter? Mattering is rooted in our connection to others, and it is critical for our Black students to have connections on campus. Black and African American students must feel that they belong here at ARC. Building relationships and developing community for our Black and African American students in educational settings is essential. Therefore, we need to reinforce these values when we create student development programs like guided pathways and home bases. Next slide. Like the other 2 groups mentioned, we also surveyed our current Black students enrolled in spring 2020. And this is what they said were motivating factors that encouraged them to do well. Positive interaction with professors was the top motivating factor that encouraged them to do well. Let me repeat, positive interactions with professors. That means you English professor, math professor, bio, humanities, history. I'm not sure if you realize the power and the influence that you have, or better yet, the opportunity that you have. But positive interactions with you makes all the difference. Financial aid and support, books, fees, food, housing. And research by Dr. Wood and Harris and Bush, they state that Black males in particularly are 78% more likely to persist in college if they attend full time. But sadly, they often can't due to lack of finances and resources, or because they must work and have many family responsibilities. And I know this story far too well. I was here over 20 years ago as a 17-year-old teen parent, attending here at ARC with a baby, trying to provide for my son, having to rob Peter to pay Paul. I was on every program in that student services building, from EOPS, AFTC, and I needed SOS. I know some of y'all privileged folks don't understand what I'm talking about, but ask somebody. And sadly, still 20 years later, financial support is still one of the top motivating factors. Another motivating factor was working with counselors, but not just any counselor, positive, supportive counselors. You counselors have the opportunity to change the trajectory of a student's life. It is critical that you see them, all of them, when they show up in your office or on the other side of that screen, that you see their potential and not assume that they can't handle rigorous classes. Trust me, they are intelligent, resilient, and will rise to the occasion. Support staff, you guys aren't off the hook either. Positive interaction with staff members is another motivating factor. Black students said interactions with you, office clerk, administrative assistant, custodian, SPA, peer mentor, LRCCD, Police officers, everybody has a role in this work. No one is exempt. Culturally relevant instruction was also a motivating factor. Black students need to see themselves reflected in your course. Our Black students need to see themselves in the literature, the articles, the curriculum. I often hear that I can't find, or I don't know any Black scholars or authors. I don't know what to do with these large class sizes, but I push back on that narrative. And I believe that you can find ways to make your class more inclusive. And if you don't know what else to do, we actually have a one sheet that gives you more specific details on what Black students need from you to succeed. And you can find that on our resource page. But as I wrap up, and my heart is racing and my adrenaline is pumping because time is now. The theme for this year's convocation is the urgency of the moment, a call to action. And as my best friend told me the other day, you better snatch that thing and get on board when it comes. And for all my people out there and sports fans who are missing football and everything, and who are watching basketball in the bubble, it's time to get charged up. This is the huddle before the big game. If we were on the field or the court, I would say, bring it in, bring it in. This is the play that we need to run for our Black students to be successful. This is the remedy, the recipe. So I challenge you to ask yourself, why are you here? Why are you at ARC? Why do you choose public education? Do Black lives really matter to me? So before we go back to the classroom, or you answer that phone call or respond to that student email, when we go on break, take a moment and look in the mirror and ask yourself, why am I here? What can I do to make a difference? The time is now. The line has been drawn in our nation's capital and here on this campus. What side are you going to be on? The action starts now. Next slide. So as I'm now going to turn it over to one of our very own current Black students at ARC. And as I like to say, a young Black scholar, I suggest you get your pencils out and write his name down, because guaranteed you will be reading his work in the next 5 to 10 years. Denzel Phoenix.
Thank you, Mr. As Black people were traumatized by the historical ramifications of slavery and all of the horror that comes with that, such as lynchings, beatings, rapings, torture, shootings, etc., which Dr. Mays has previously covered. Black people carry the historical trauma of our ancestors, and this has caused us to develop barriers as protection from the brutalization and dehumanization of Black bodies and Black lives. As of today, there are Black students, some as young as 18, to even my mother, who is in her 60s, trying to obtain an education, but has nowhere to go and no way to obtain the information and opportunities needed to excel. As a Black student myself who was railroaded into the special education program, as many students of color have been, it hindered my ability to become the best version of myself. Not seeing myself not only in the curriculum or within the faculty of the schools I have attended. I never learned about my ancestors and the trials and tribulations they had to overcome in school. I never learned about the accomplishments of my ancestors in my classes. In fact, people who look like me were mostly non-existent within most of my educational journey. It was not until I came across programs like a Mojisaku Learning Community and the genuine people who saw me beyond the melanated skin and the preconceived notions that come with it. Being able to have people who intentionally made it their purpose to make sure that I not only understood and was aware of all of the opportunities I have as a student, but also made sure to create and put me and people like me into courses that reflected me as an African-American Black person in America. To be able to let those barriers down and speak with my full intention and have the same people not only see me, but understand the barriers that I had to put up as self-protection for my traumas. It is highly important that Black students have access to resources we need in order to excel, like financial aid and culturally relevant curriculums created with Black students in mind. We can no longer only say Black Lives Matter. There has to be and must be action behind those words. Black Lives Matter is only words as long as there is no foundation with tangible and beneficial resources available for people of color to access. So I ask everyone watching, will you stand with us? Will you show that Black lives truly matter?
Thank you, Denzel and Tara. We're done.
Wow, so powerful. That was an incredible accounting of experience and what we can do, and also of the educational debt and the under-resourcing that's part of higher education. Thank you very much, everyone. So let's take another breath together. Thank you to everyone on the panel for sharing your insights and experiences. One thing I heard is how important context is to what we do and why we're here, and the recommendations for each DI team. And how important it is for all of us to understand our commonalities as educators and human beings across groups. But those commonalities and similarities are made meaningful only through understanding our differences and making those meaningful and value added, right? It's important to bring our self-awareness to all of this, and thank you. I've learned a great deal this morning. We had planned a whole series of questions, but because of time, I'm only going to ask the first one, and this is really directed towards the student members of our panel. The DI team reports show that the top motivating factor for students in all 3 DI groups is positive interactions with faculty members. What do faculty do that you've experienced that create that positive interaction? And in your experience, if you can add on, what do classified and management educators do to create positive interaction? Maria Elena, would you like to start?
Yes, good morning. This question, I have a couple of things, so I'll just go with what professors are already doing in the classroom. That's amazing, which I found very useful, was to stress the availability of your office hours. No matter how I felt that a professor thought of me, knowing that they were available to me for questions about material was so important. And also letting the students know that the material was going to be heavy. I never asked for an extension on a reading, but knowing that that material was a lot to process made me want to move forward. With regards to interaction, I'm just going to go back to something that was said in the last presentation, which is that your actions are powerful. I am here because I've been in from homeless student to student parent, I've been in every role. And I'm here because of an equity program when I was transitioning from middle school to high school. And the words of a man who recently passed, Frank Withrow, who said, to be somebody should be your goal. And I wanted to walk it like I talk it for my kids. And that meant getting the degrees that I told them that they needed to get to be successful. So you need to understand that, yes, from that desk to that lecture, your actions, your words, your encouragement, your discouragement, it's all impactful. And you can be the difference when those students are lost at that first couple weeks or that first midterm. Just being encouraging can make all the difference and keep their butt in that seat for another week. So please understand your power and use it. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria Elena. Denzel, would you like to respond?
Yes. So what professors can do for our students that best helps our students is being able to not only show that you acknowledge them, but you're willing to go beyond just the curriculum and also make sure that these students best understand themselves through your curriculum. So for me, speaking from experience as a Mojisaku student, taking Emojisaku classes where the curriculum reflected me as a Black student, it allowed me not only to see myself, but also let my barriers down so that I can express myself fully, so that I can become the best of myself. So if teachers were to actually see their students and not just a number within a classroom and acknowledge that student for who they are and what they bring to the table and actually challenge their students, then they will become the best that they can be. Thank you.
Thank you, Denzel. Pauline, would you like to respond?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
The question, okay, is about what faculty members and other classified and management educators may be able to do to create those positive interactions with students to encourage and to encourage students to continue and to succeed.
I would have to speak from a personal experience. Just having people believe in me and like giving me a second chance and an opportunity. Hello?
Yes.
Oh, can you guys hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
And I would just have to speak from person. Okay, so my personal experience is I was referred from a counselor, Judy Mays and Jennifer Scalzi, to EOPNS back in 2014. And I was newly sober, 6 months. And I felt like these two counselors gave me a second chance to prove myself. And because of them, I'm still working at EOPNS. And I've grown so much in my sobriety. And just because they gave me, like they didn't see me for who my past was. They see me as a college student trying to do better. And I feel like all educators should look that way. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Pauline. And so I'd like to wrap this up at this point. Really sincere gratitude to everyone who's contributed. I think you can tell, with everyone on the DI project teams and with the new teams that are coming up this year, this has truly been a work that comes from the heart. And so the question is, right, what can you do and what will you do? With that, I'm going to turn this back over to Nick to give us directions on how to go into our breakout sessions. Thank you.
Thank you all for your important work. And I just want to take another moment to take a breath so we can take in all of that information. So the next part of our presentation will occur in the breakout rooms. You can either go to the ARC Convocation webpage, or you can check your email for a message from the CTL to find the appropriate room for you. Those who use sign language or captioning can remain in the room where they are. The others should go to the room corresponding to your birth month. If you are in math or English, your areas have specialized rooms. The breakout rooms will begin at 10:25, and we want to see you back here at 10:55. Or at 11, sorry, at 11. See you then. Ooh.
Hi, Nick. Nick, are you there?
Sorry, say that again, Connie?
Oh, I just wanted to make sure that you can hear me.
Yes.
Okay. And so just to be clear, our video is off.
When we're speaking, we can turn our video on. That's helpful, I think.
Okay.
We're still streaming. We're going to try and stop streaming.